Hello, everyone. Just to let you know that we'll be waiting another extra minute or so just to get a chance for everyone to join. I think we'll get started. For the first few minutes anyway, will mainly be introduction. So this allows participants to join in a little bit later as well. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized by the Right to Repair campaign on how software can make independent repairs impossible. My name is Alexandre Isaac, and I work as a campaigner for the Right to Repair campaign. This is our third webinar, and it's always a pleasure to see so many of you interested in these issues. Before we get started into the topic, I just wanted to share a few words about the campaign. So the Right to Repair campaign is a coalition of 46 organizations from 16 European countries that are all fighting for a universal right to repair. Universal in the sense of all products, of course, but also in the sense that we want everybody to be able to repair their stuff if they want to. We were launched in September 2019, and we have since been active both at European level and at national level. You can find that more on repair.eu and learn how you can become part of the movement, but also how you can support our mission. Before we dive into this topic, I also just wanted to share a few technical information. There is a Q&A that is open. So if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please ask your questions there. You can also vote for the questions and then they'll go at the top. And if you have any technical issues, or if you want to introduce yourself and let us know where you come from and where you work, you can use the chat for that. If anything is not working for you, if you come to the presentation, we'll make sure to enter you in the chat. So because we have about an hour together, we'll dive straight in. By the way, this webinar will be in English and it will be recorded. So if at some point you need to hop out, there will be a recording made available in the next few days. So today we are here to talk about part pairing, which is an increasingly common practice used by manufacturers of smartphone and other electronic products to control who can and can't perform certain types of repair. It is made possible by serialization of spare parts, and here is how it works. Some parts have a unique serial number, which is paired to an individual unit of a device using software. If any of these parts need replacing during a repair, they will not be accepted unless remotely paired to the device again via software by the manufacturer. This approach could create major barriers to independent and self-repair. And this is why we are organizing this webinar today with our three guests. First one is Alexandre Isaac, who is the founder of the Repair Academy, a French initiative that specializes in micro soldering and training of new repairers. Then we'll hear from Marie Castelli, who is Backmarket Public Affairs Manager. She has been working in government relations for the past 11 years in France and in Europe. And then we'll hear from Thomas Obsamer, who is a repair policy engineer at iFixit and a member of the European Right to Repair Campaign steering group. So once again, before we get started, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A feature, which you should be seeing at the bottom of your screen. So we'll start with Alexandre. If it's all right with you, the floor is yours and you can start sharing your presentation.
Perfect, thanks. Let me share that. I need a second. Is it fine? Can you see the presentation? Full screen? Okay, great. So first, so how software can make independent repair impossible. This is subject of today. I'll let Chloe introduce myself. First of all, what is serialization? Well, it's when you put serial numbers, so it's just a unique series of numbers and letters into a component. Usually this serial number is encoded into an EEPROM, which is an electronic component. And these components can be really small and you can find them pretty much everywhere. So this is just an example on the left of what you can find just in an iPhone. All of these numbers are unique for this phone. Why would you want serialization? First of all, manufacturers, well, they need to monitor the performance of all of their components. They want you to have a phone with all the components they want your phone to have. For them, it's also possible to do quality checks. If they have some problems on some parts, they can easily go up the chain to see what went wrong. Security features also, you can't install parts that could, well, bring problems to your phone. And also it's a very interesting feature for stock management. So this is mostly why they implement serialization. Where can we find these numbers? Well, actually, if we look at a phone, so here example is going to be an iPhone because that's where you find the most serial numbers today. Pretty much everywhere, coming to battery, cameras, screens, of course, on the motherboard. So the motherboard is where you find all the electronic components. But also on all the new features that they implemented over the years as biometric scanners, all the sensors like maybe proximity sensors or even some ambient light sensors, home buttons, and we're thinking maybe they could implement this in even more parts. So this is something that's been, well, here for a while. So if we check that graph, we've referenced all the parts we could find on iPhones, starting with the iPhone 3G, all the way up to the iPhone 12 series, which are the latest phones that came out. We can see there's an increase in non-replaceable parts because of serial numbers. So as Chloe was saying earlier, today, if for some parts, you just take 2 genuine iPhones, brand new, and you just want to swap parts, well, you might not be able to because there's a serial number and you need an approval. Some parts are actually serialized and replaceable, but you would maybe lose a functionality. For example, screens, you can replace them, but you'd get an error message. You have some tuning capabilities that will disappear, and so on. And for some parts, as we said, well, like Face ID or Touch ID, which are biometric features, you can't replace them at all. So this is a really big problem. And this is something, well, just by looking at this graph, you understand this is something that's going to be really, really problematic for all the repair industry. So here are some examples of what a user would see. So here we're seeing what the user is going to see. So on the screen, you get a message saying, well, this is not an original display. On your battery, saying this is not an original battery. Or for your biometric features, well, it's simply not activated anymore. So you can't, you'd have to use the old passcode on your phone, like if you have an older phone. So the loss of function is something that's going to, well, impact mostly customers. But maybe there could be a way to go through these serial numbers. So today, the repair technicians have found a few ways to go over these problems. Because, well, as a customer, would you be ready to repair your phone and then have some functionalities that would disappear? Maybe not. So some ways were found. Well, it requires some pretty technical skills like micro soldering. So that's what we do, but we reckon it's something pretty complicated and you need to know how to micro solder, but also you need to wait for some engineers to design some very, very special programmers to reprogram all these little EEPROMs we were talking in the first slide. So this is really complicated, and having to do a few hours of micro soldering just to replace a screen or a simple camera, this is not what we call something repairable. We want to go back to the old-fashioned way where you just, well, you have a broken screen, take a new screen, and then just swap them on the new phone and everything works. Nowadays, that's not possible. You need a few hours of work, which is maybe not very cost-effective. Manufacturers have, well, provided some solutions because they do want you maybe to repair your phone. So Apple has an independent repair provider program. Well, they can authorize you to buy parts from them, authorize the serial number so you could actually repair a screen and not have any error messages or not have any feature loss. You'd actually repair all these biometric features, which is pretty much impossible nowadays. Also, if you're in this program, well, people will probably trust you because, oh, you have a big Apple logo. But there are also a few issues. You can't do every single repairs. You're limited to screen, batteries, cameras, speakers, and the vibrator engine. There are also some audits. You have to share all your customers' information. You can't use the parts you want, so you only have to buy parts from Apple, and parts are pretty costly, around 100 euros for a battery, which seems like a lot. So some solutions are there, but they're not perfect yet. One of the biggest problems with serialized parts is not using third-party spare parts. Today, most of the spare parts that are installed on phones that we actually repair are made by third-party manufacturers, mostly in China. We like these parts because, first of all, well, they've been produced for years now. If you look at iPhone 3 or even iPhone 4, they've already had, factories building all these spare parts. So nowadays they have some really good quality spare parts, and even some of them offer new features. The price is pretty nice. You don't need to spend 100 euros for an old screen, and you actually can buy all these parts in advance. So once in your store, if you have a customer coming in, you can just, well, you have the spare part in stock. So in a few minutes, you can repair his phone. You don't need to spend a week ordering the part. And also, well, you can buy every single spare part if they build it, of course. So you're not restricted in your level of repairs. Also, you don't need all these programmers, and you don't need to do very special micro soldering. Regarding market, we're going to have a few issues with this serialization. First of all, customers, they will totally lose the trust into all the different repair businesses. Because if you have, well, error messages, if you have functionality loss, well, I mean, people won't repair their phones anymore. So devices will directly go to the bin. They won't be repaired anymore. For repair businesses and bigger refurbishing businesses, this is going to be a huge issue if you can't actually buy broken phone, repair them, so to offer them a second life. And also regarding jobs, there's going to be a huge impact because if repair businesses can't do as many repairs, or they need to find very, very highly skilled technicians to do micro soldering and all that, might have a huge impact on jobs. So finally, what are we looking at? Well, a few solutions here would be pretty easy. First of all, less serialization, or just the possibility to authorize ourselves without needing the original manufacturer's approval to authorize parts. Access to all of these parts would be really nice. Well, here's a view of iPhone 12. There are many spare parts in it, and we can't buy all of them. Authorizing third-party manufacturers is probably a dream, but today it's how the industry works, and it helps us a lot to be able to repair phones. And finally, a customer, when he buys a phone, it's his. So what if he had the choice on which parts he wanted to implement into his phone? Well, thanks for listening to all this, and I'll let the floor to someone else.
Thanks, Alexandre. Thanks for sharing your perspective as a reporter on this. It was very insightful and very interesting and great presentation. Now we will move on to Marie, who, as I was saying earlier, is Backmarket's public affairs manager, and I'm sure she'll tell you about it, but Backmarket is one of the leaders in the refurbished products market and is also a member of the Retropie Campaign. So Marie, whenever you're ready.
Thanks a lot, Chloe. Hey, everyone. Really happy to be here. So as Chloe said, we at Backmarket are the first marketplace that is specialized only in refurbished electronics. I'm not telling you this for the sake of presenting Backmarket, but in order to explain you why we have kind of an expertise on this serialization and pairing issues that we consider one of the major threats happening on both repair and refurbishment and really worries us. So as I said, we are a marketplace, meaning we put in contact refurbishers and customers that are interested in buying second-hand electronics. And as you can imagine, phones are kind of, at the moment, the broadest part of the market. And that's where we monitor a lot of serialization issues. Alexandre was using Apple as an example. I will as well, because it's the most relevant one and the most common one. But that's also the one that shows us how it can be a threat to extending the life of products, because that's basically it. And just for the reminder, I'm pretty sure everyone knows why we need to extend the life of products, but it's to fight against climate change, production of electronic devices as the hugest part, as the hugest share in the ecological impact of tech. And that's really important that we have long-lasting products and we are able to repair them, refurbish them, reuse them. So at Back Market, we work in 15 countries and we have 1,500 refurbishers working with us as a partner. And these refurbishers have access to approximately 5 million clients we have had so far on the platform. And that puts us at kind of a unique position as we are at the crossroad of these professional repairers, because let's face it, refurbishers and repairers, it's kind of the same business. The only difference is the refurbisher is purchasing the product, repairing, and then reselling, when the repairer repairs for the end customer, but that's the same kind of businesses and the same kind of issues Alexandre just described. We put these refurbishers in contact with customers that are interested by second-hand electronics, and we can really monitor what are the issues. What we try to achieve as Back Market is that there are no factual reason anymore for a customer to prefer new over second-hand. It's a matter of course, customer experience, but at the very center of the customer experience, there's a quality of the product, of the device you propose to the customer, and how you can answer the fears and the worries this customer may have. And here, pairing already creates additional fear and can generate a problem. So let's face it, OEMs, they've tried to control repair and create barriers to over extension of product life for long. There are classical issues that have appeared a while ago, like, I don't know if any of you have already tried to open an iPhone, but there's this very funny screw heads we all know that only exist on iPhones and that are kind of making it impossible to open with a simple screwdriver. So that are kind of the classical hardware-related blockers repairers and refurbishers have been facing so far, and that are problems like we can identify and solve, and that's ongoing, for example, with the eco-design regulation for smartphones and tablets. So these are really easy to identify problems that are being solved, but now there's this new threat, a software-related threat that is way more dangerous as it can evolve through time, you know. And Alexandre showed it really relevantly at the beginning. It can appear like really small and not something really threatening, but it's growing, and we see it growing and growing. And what it means in terms of impact and actual threat? Well, the first threat we've been monitoring at Back Market is it's creating anxiety for end customer. Serialization and part pairing have grown in a relevant way since iPhone XS approximately, and iPhone XS is kind of the refurbished bestseller of 2020-2021. So we see refurbishers selling more and more of them. And with the rise of those products and the issues Alexandre described with this warning message about the functionalities of your phone, at Back Market, we see after-sales services tickets raising. So we can really monitor that it's creating anxiety for end customer. Every day we have customers reaching out to us because they kind of panic because they see those messages. When we explain them that, for example, for the battery, it's not a problem, it's only a warning message, but all the functionalities are still working, a share of the customer will keep the product, a share of them will ask to be reimbursed. So that's to show you how big of a problem it is for a customer to receive this kind of message. It's a big deal, even though all the functionalities of the phone are maintained. Well, it creates mistrust for the customer and fake quality issues for repaired and refurbished devices, which is the key to the growth of this market. So that's really a big deal. So that's the first effect we've been monitoring at Black Market. The second one, and Alexandre described it, is the problem it causes for refurbishers to be able to actually repair the devices and the type of skills it may require in order to be able to go over or around these pairing systems if needed. So that creates job issues, as Alexandre was saying. And the most worrying is it actually has the power to prevent any refurbishment, because as Alexandre was mentioning, if we take the example of Apple, they have this certified repairers program where a customer can still repair its phone. With refurbishment, it doesn't exist outside of Apple, you know? So basically it means if Apple wants to create part pairing for every part, spare parts they have, then they can actually block refurbishment because it's always independent professionals that are performing it. So that's kind of how worrying it is. And the last, but not least, threat we see with this part pairing problem is that it prevents from, as Alexandre was saying, using compatible third-party spare parts. And that's the key to both repair and refurbishment, because it's a matter of business model. Most of the time, using a third-party compatible spare part, and the most common are batteries and displays, is way more interesting than purchasing an original part. So even though if the original part is available, and that's not the case always, as some of you may know, it's still a challenge to build a business model, knowing that for refurbishment, for example, the professional buys the phone after its first life, cleans it, repair it, and then resell it on the market. And the price at which you can resell the phone on the market cannot be too close to the new device's price. If it is, then the refurbisher will never sell it. So it's a very elastic market, basically, meaning that the price of the repair, the cost of repair, which is in the middle of the process I just described, is key in order for those professionals to be able to live from their jobs. And compatible parts are a key to that kind of issues, as they are way more affordable than original parts. And the worst, most crazy situation, I'd say, is it's also preventing the use of refurbished original parts. Basically, when you refurbish, a refurbisher may purchase, for example, 2 used phones. One is too damaged to be repaired, but let's say the camera is still working. Then the refurbisher, and the other one has a broken camera, but the rest of the phone is working. Then the job of the refurbisher, and that's called cannibalization in the sector, is to use the working camera from the first iPhone and install it into the new iPhone. Well, that's impossible with serialization. So even with original part, you cannot repair the phone, and that's kind of going against circularity in tech and reuse of spare parts. So that's really, really a big deal. And as I said, we really feel this year we are at a crossroad as the share of products that are serialized is growing on the market. And we'll see the impact it has on the raise we've been experiencing for refurbished goods. So yeah, that's our experience on this serialization and pairing issue. And as you understand, we feel it's a very big deal. It's a very big threat. And as it's software, it can evolve through blocking any independent repair and refurbishment, which is pretty scary.
Thank you, Marie, for sharing your and the refurbishers and repairers that are part of Backmarket's network experience on that. And as you said, this is a growing threat, and this is exactly why we're here today. And we'll move on to Thomas's presentation now, which will, I think, address some of the potential solutions. So as I was saying earlier, Thomas Opsamer is a repair policy engineer at iFixit and a member of the European Right to Repair campaign's steering group. So he's very active in the campaign. Thank you, Thomas, for sharing your screen already. And I would, just before you get started, I'd like to encourage everyone again to ask questions if you have any in the Q&A feature. And if you have any technical issues or links that you want to share, please do so in the general chat, as I've seen quite a few people already doing.
Okay, thanks. So yes, after a vivid description of the problem, I think, by Alexandre and by Marie, I'd like now to go into some of the policy aspects, so sort of the context, policy context of the problem, which I think may also at least partially answer a question asked by Reinhard Weisinger in the Q&A. So I'll sort of sketch the policy context, and then I'd like to go into two specific details, namely aftermarket parts and security as a reason for, or potential reason for doing the pairing. So first of all, we have to realize that we have conflicting goals here that are at play. On the one hand, we have the manufacturers who want to keep control over the product along the whole product life cycle, which they may do because then they can make a profit rather off of the product during the whole life cycle. They can also have very valid reasons, such as wanting to take responsibility for the product across the life cycle if they actually do so. Consumers, they would obviously have at heart the freedom of choice. They would want to choose which product to buy, but also when the product is broken, to whom they can confide the repair, and also which sort of parts might be used for the repair. They would want to choose that themselves and not leave that to be determined by the manufacturer. And then, well, society at large, I would say, represented here by the EU policymakers, has a definite interest in climate change, alleviating climate change, so reducing the footprint of all of these products. It has been stated that extending the lifetime of the smartphones in the EU by just 1 year would be equivalent CO2 savings of taking 1 million cars off of the roads during a year. So that would be huge. And that is why policymakers are interested in these so-called material efficiency aspects. And so relatively recently, there was a report published about the political intentions of the Commission called the European Green Deal. And there is actually a section that deals with the overarching topic. So it recognizes the importance of the footprint of electronic devices. It mentions that consumers need to have a choice, and it explicitly mentions the right to repair so the consumers can actually prolong the lifetime of their products. And this is obviously a political goal that is sort of contradicted with the things we are seeing happening now with the parts pairing. So how can we deal with that? Which policy instruments do we have at our disposal? The most logical one would obviously be eco-design. It's actually the only piece of legislation that really deals with the product itself when it comes to environmental performance. But it is product by product. So it's not what we call a horizontal regulation that would affect all products at once. It's a so-called vertical regulation that only deals with one type of product per regulation, which means that it is slow. And we now have a regulation for smartphones that is underway. It's a project that has been ongoing for about 2 years now, I think. Many of the people in the panel today are actually involved in the stakeholder discussions. I'm sure other people are actually watching the webinar as well and may intervene later. So there is actually a project ongoing that already deals to some extent or may deal with this problem. So the text you see on your screen, including the yellow part at the bottom right, it already talks about remote authorization of serial numbers. So the people who are working on the file are aware of the problem, but we will need to make sure that we really get the proper wording in there to make sure that actually repair isn't hampered in any way. In the way it's currently worded, there would still be many barriers, the most important of which would be that it's actually up to the manufacturer to decide who would be a professional repairer, because we don't have a national system in place to identify professional repairers. And also, for instance, refurbishers would not be mentioned. So for back markets, for instance, this would not bring a solution. This would also only solve the problem for smartphones. And as it was discussed already, it's a problem that we expect to see in more and more products. So it begs the question, shouldn't we have a so-called horizontal regulation? So shouldn't we have some policy instruments that would actually deal with all products at once? It's not very clear which existing regulation could deal with that. We have horizontal regulations such as unfair commercial practices or the Consumer Rights Directive, but those deal more with the interaction between the customer and the seller. So which practices are allowable to sell, how can the consumer revoke the sales contract, etc. So they would not address the product or the manufacturer. There's a potential way forward with an initiative that we expect to come out soon, which is the Empowering Consumers Initiative. We may have a chance to see something addressing serialization in that, but we'll have to wait. But so for now, the only tool that really is at our disposal is the eco-design regulation. And then, as I said, I wanted to talk about two more issues. One is the issue of aftermarket parts. So you've heard both Alexandre and Marie talk about where they source parts and that these are often not original parts. So there's different ways that you can find parts to repair a smartphone. You can obviously buy a new original part. Well, that is if Apple wants to sell it to you, which they will only do if you're an authorized repairer. Or you could have an original part recovered from other devices, such as Marie referred to. So that's what's called cannibalizing or scavenging. Or you could buy aftermarket parts. So you could buy new parts, but that are not sold by the manufacturer of the phone. And they could actually be made by the same parts manufacturer. So they could be by the same parts manufacturer, but not commercialized by the phone manufacturer. Could come from the same factory, or they could come from other parts manufacturers. So that's a spectrum that we have available. And all of these different parts could or could not be enabled or disabled by serialization and parts pairing. And at this point, it is only the manufacturer that can decide which parts they would actually want to allow. And we see that as a problem. There is clearly a gray zone here in that it's not prohibited to use non-original parts, but there also is not a right to use non-original parts. So it's also not prohibited to prevent the use of non-original parts. So it's sort of, you know, the Wild West out there. Anyone can sort of do as they like, since it's not clearly regulated. If we compare that to the automotive sector, there it's really very, very clearly regulated. So you have a regulation which is called the Motor Vehicle Block Exemption Regulation, which really defines this. And it says that an original part is any part that is produced to the original spec. So it doesn't have to be produced by the manufacturer. It doesn't have to be by the car manufacturer. It doesn't have to come from the same factory where the car manufacturer buys their parts. It can be any parts as long as they are technically compatible with the product. And independent repairers have the right to purchase the parts wherever they want. They can use parts that meet those specs, whether they're branded or not. And for instance, the warranty cannot be voided because those non-original parts have been used. So there we have a very clear example of how this could be dealt with, and it would be very, very beneficial to have a similar regulation in place for electronics that would really clarify the situation. And then the last thing I wanted to address is the security that is often invoked as a reason for having serialization and parts pairing. Alexandre already mentioned it. We've never had any discussion with the manufacturer, not in the stakeholder meetings either, where they have really clearly explained why it is absolutely necessary to use parts pairing to solve the problem of authentication. So we can only guess. So what's on the screen is actually my best guess. And if we have any phone manufacturer that's watching and that wants to correct me, I'd be very happy to have a discussion on that. So on the top row, I would say, is what seems to be the supposed problem. The part would be the blue box that you see, and that part would contain a sensor. So in this case, a fingerprint sensor, for instance, could also be a camera. And it would also then contain a storage medium. So that would often be an EEPROM, as Alexandre explained, which would store the serial number, which would store a data string that corresponds to, for instance, the fingerprint. And the part would then, as you scan your finger, the fingerprint scanner would then send that data string to that chip that would compare that data string to the data string stored. And it would say, yes, this is the fingerprint that was verified. And it would then send the thumbs up to the motherboard to say, okay, the authentication was successful. So obviously, if this is the case, then a person with bad intentions could indeed replace that whole component, that sensor and that storage medium. I could replace that component with a part that had actually my fingerprint stored in it. And then that part would also send the OK signal to the motherboard if I swipe my finger across it. And that is a problem supposedly that needs to be solved. Although I don't think there's any product that actually works this way. So the supposed solution then, which is the middle row, is that I will swipe my finger, the component will verify that it's the correct fingerprint, but additionally, the storage medium will also have a serial number. That's the number that you see in red there in the middle of the screen. And so the main board will not only check whether we have a thumbs up signal for successful authentication, but it will also verify whether that successful authentication signal comes from a part that has the original serial number. And then when both of these checks are correct, then actually the authentication is successful. Now, some of you may already come to the conclusion when looking at this that it's extraordinarily complicated, and unnecessarily so, because you can solve the problem much more easily by just not storing that data string that corresponds to the fingerprint in the component. You can just store it straight on the motherboard and have the component not check whether the string matches anything that's registered in the component. Just have the component send the data string to the motherboard, have the motherboard do the check. Then there is absolutely no need for serialization. And if I swipe my finger, I will send another data string to the motherboard and authentication will not be successful. And this is, I think, how most manufacturers actually do it, instead of the convoluted system that you see in the middle, and that is used as a justification for serialization. So to wrap up, there's an easy solution to provide safe authentication without needing serialization and parts pairing. It is to simply store the authentication key on the main board and not on the component, and just send the data string that is scanned straight to the motherboard. If that is, for whichever reason, not possible, the minimum would be that if the authentication, if the part has been replaced by a non-original part, that at least only the authentication is disabled and not the complete part functionality, which we have seen in the past with ERF 53, where home buttons they just rendered the complete phone useless. So that's definitely something that we cannot accept. So worst case is that the authentication could be disabled and that the user would then need to authenticate via other means, which could be a PIN code, and then reinstate the authentication of the potentially non-original part. So that is really the minimum that we would require to make sure that authentication is still possible and safe, but we don't have negative consequences for repair and refurbishment. I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Thomas. That was very interesting as well. There has been quite a few questions, so I'll dive straight into, if you still have any additional questions, you can ask them in the Q&A, but we'll try to wrap this up in 20 minutes. The first one is a generic question, but I'd like to ask it mainly to Alexandre and Thomas. Serialization is portrayed as negative, but isn't the picture more complex? To be able to identify the source of parts should help with traceability and quality control. The issues are tying serial parts number together and scary messages. A neutral messaging stating, for example, this screen identifies as coming from manufacturer XYZ would be helpful, as consumers would have a better understanding of what they get. However, as can be seen with batteries and USB stick, the information provided by the device can be rewritten with the right tools, and also some iPhones refuse parts from an identical iPhone. So how reliable is serialization in the first place? So I guess there's two questions there: the reliability, but also it's portrayed as negative, but isn't it a bit more complex when you look at the other aspects? And if Thomas, I see you're unmuted, do you want to go first?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between serialization and parts pairing. So serialization could serve a number of purposes. Parts pairing and refusing functionality of parts that don't have the correct serial number is something way more specific and something way more constrictive. So we have no problem at all with having a serial number embedded in a part to improve traceability. We have a problem with the fact that any part that does not bear the serial number of the part that was fitted in the factory is refused and makes the product not function. So I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, or otherwise maybe you should repeat the part of the question that I haven't addressed.
But I'm also wondering whether maybe Alexandre has some thoughts about this, or?
Regarding reliability, you actually say, Panda Mary said that you can actually reprogram some of them. That's true. Some of them can be reprogrammed with the programmers I showed in my slides, but some of them are actually not reprogrammable, and these are the ones that are a problem for us. Yes, there is going to be a reliability problem with the ones you can reprogram, because that means a repairman could do whatever he wants with these. But if it's just pairing a new camera to a phone so that it works, I don't see where the problem could be. It could be a problem with some batteries, putting in some fake information inside of it, but I guess you'll have to trust your repairman at that point. And the idea of having just a message that says, well, this part comes from this place would be a nice idea, but actually having a real pop-up telling a normal customer that's not technician at all, telling him, well, this part doesn't come from Apple, you're just going to scare him off. I think most people watching this are actually pretty techie regarding comment section. So we wouldn't be scared, but maybe a customer would be like totally scared of having this kind of message.
Yeah, and that relates to what Mary was saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just make an additional comment. One important thing to underline is that at least for refurbishment, I don't know for repair, but most of the compatible parts, third-party parts that are used in refurbishment are batteries and displays, as I was saying. For the most kind of technical, complex OEM tech-related parts, then the most common situation is cannibalization, basically. So there's no real justification on reliability and parts quality, knowing that for at least batteries and display, it's technologies that are pretty well handled by third parties, And then on the most tricky ones, the common situation is using an original part coming from another device.
Thank you. Alexandre, could you explain why you need to micro solder in order to use a spare part that is non-directly supplied by Apple? And also, could a software update by the manufacturer stop a repaired phone from working, as it happened in the past with error 53 message?
Well, it's actually a bit more complicated than this. I actually need to micro solder on parts that do come from Apple because all the parts that come from Apple have these serial numbers inside. And when I can't transfer this serial number from one phone to another using a programmer, I actually need to unsolder these chips and then swap them in between. Like it could be a camera, something as small as a camera, or the dot projector from the Face ID, or it could be if you have a home button that's actually broken, I'll have to use 9 micrometers little wires to repair the original parts instead of replacing it. So anytime there's a part that Apple doesn't sell or that a third-party manufacturer can't make, that's when I have to micro solder. But for example, for a screen, up until the iPhone XS Max, I don't need to micro solder. Starting iPhone 11, there's 2 EEPROMs, one you can program, one you can't. Then I need to micro solder so you don't have an error message. And we're not going to use these kind of techniques on a screen because it's not cost effective at some point. So you'll get an error message at that point. But yeah, for old screens, you don't need to micro solder anything. Just you could transfer the data from one screen to another using a programmer.
Thank you. There's also a question specifically on something you mentioned, Thomas, which is the example of the car industry. Maybe can you go back a little bit on that and how potentially we could learn from how it's been dealt in the automotive sector?
Yes, well, I'm not sure what the person would want me to explain more specifically. So in the car industry, you obviously have a lot of issues that are at stake, given that you have a very high value product that you want to keep alive for as long as possible. You have very important safety risks, obviously, since a car is potentially a lethal weapon. There has been historically a very wide network for repair that did include independent repair actually since the beginning, and actually having only the manufacturer's repair network would absolutely be insufficient to keep all of the cars going. And so that's why there was a necessity to work on that. The impulse came clearly from the parts manufacturers. So the independent parts manufacturers had lots of manufacturers of filters and spark plugs and whatever parts that were already manufacturing these parts for the OEMs, for the car manufacturers, but also selling them independently. And so, yeah, there was a need to structure that and to make sure that this happened in a way that was controlled and where, yeah, both the fair competition in the market was ensured and the safety. Hence, yeah, the mention of the original specs that need to be met. But so it gives the independent car repairers very, very clear rights that independent electronics repairers don't have. Not sure if that's the expansion that the person wanted, or.
I think there's quite some really interesting elements there. Thank you, Thomas. The next one is for Alexandre, related to one of the slides you showed, but maybe Marie, you also have some elements on that. Alexandre, you said in one of your first slides that serialization is interesting for stock management. That would be for OEMs only, right? Because from what you said about independent repairers, that's actually a barrier to having the right part available in stock. So it would rather be a problem for stock management with an impact on the likeliness to repair. Or maybe the person mixed up and you didn't say it was an asset?
It's an asset for the manufacturer, but it wouldn't really be an asset for the repairman. I mean, we wouldn't really need serial numbers. Maybe a refurbishment company that's maybe doing like 500, 1,000 phones a day could use that serial number to track in its own factory, but most repair businesses are smaller, so we wouldn't need that actually. So it's better for the OEM, but for us, it's not really a big use.
Yeah, and maybe to add on refurbishers, most of them have their own labeling system when a product does enter a factory, you know. So it's not common to use the serial number of parts in order to manage your stock, and they have their own systems existing. So I don't even think it could be used as an advantage for them.
The next two aren't really questions, they're more comments, and so they're open for comments for the three of you if you have anything to add. The first one is, this has the potential to be so much bigger. We need to remember that this is not just affecting the cell phone market, but every repair. This monopoly created by the manufacturers can eliminate all third-party repair. It will affect appliances, TVs, and even automotive repair. This will ultimately lead to more e-waste and put an additional strain on our already stressed environment. And the second one is, we suspect that this sort of software lock is coming to laptops because of Microsoft Windows 11 requirement for a TPM chip. I don't know if anyone has comments on the spread of this and on laptops specifically.
Oh, you want to go, Mary?
No, go.
Okay. Well, this is something we talked about iPhones, but we have a few issues on Samsung. Not many issues on other Android devices. We have huge issues on MacBooks. If you look at the T2 chip, I've heard about this TPM chip on Windows 11. Then I haven't had the chance to work on it yet. We know it's locked on most car calculators. TVs for now, it looks like it's fine, but it might come pretty soon. And everything in your house has a ton of electronic now. Your air purifier, whatever, it has Wi-Fi on it, has chips. They could lock everything pretty fast. Maybe just even with a software update. I think someone asked about that. Yeah, a software update could definitely brick all your devices if they wanted to. So yeah, it's everything that's electronic today could be serialized and have huge problems for repair.
Yeah, fully agreed, and that's the reason why we really raised the red flag on this problem, even though it's still restricted to some brands and some specific devices. What we see is it's growing since it has been created by Apple, let's say. It's growing, and it's a huge temptation for OEM as it provides a mean to control their device over their life, as Thomas was saying, which is pretty appealing for OEMs. So we know if there's no regulation put in place in order to regulate this type of behavior, it's going to grow and spread to any electronics.
Thomas, do you have anything to add?
Full acknowledgement. We see these problems usually appearing first in high-tech products, and then they trickle down to other sorts of products. And so any product containing any electronics, and that's just about everything today, could work that way. And that's why smartphones are a very symbolic product. And so if we don't stop it at the smartphone level, yeah, then it will become a much harder fight for other products down the line. So this is really where we should try to draw a line in the sand to make sure that it doesn't go any further. Yes.
So the next question is also pretty much for everyone. It's, how is the quality of non-original parts assured? How is it done now, and how could it be improved or done in the future?
Actually, regarding parts, you have the example every day when you go to the supermarket. Well, either you buy the brand that has a white package and it's like maybe 50 cents a kilo for your food, or you get the higher brand that's like maybe 10 bucks a kilo. You have the same thing regarding spare parts. You have some manufacturers that produce really high quality parts that cost a bit more, and you have some manufacturers that actually produce pretty low quality parts. They can purchase really dirt cheap. But if you want a repair business that's going to be thriving and you don't want people coming back to you, you're probably going to purchase the better parts. And a good technician actually tests out his parts, and he tests out a manufacturer before actually working with big volumes with them. So yeah, if you ask any repair tech, they'll tell you, well, I only work with this person because I've worked with him for very long. I know his parts and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not sure how technical the question was intended. So it's all about quality control, and the quality control is not a specific problem for a non-original part. Apple doesn't make any parts themselves. They have them produced by third parties like Foxconn and others. And so they have to do quality control on the parts that they get to make sure that they are okay. And any other party can also do quality control if they wish to do so. And there's ways to automate that. There's ways to mount a battery into a testing rig or a screen into a testing rig, and to have a routine performed that tests all of the functions of that component, so that you have a very good idea of the overall quality of the part. So you can really do batch analysis and test whatever percentage of the batch that you want. So it's not a technical problem. It can be resource intensive, and you need the right equipment to do it, but it's absolutely feasible. It's just that it's not standardized. So anyone who's actually purchasing the parts need to do it for themselves, because there's no quality standard that can guarantee you that a smartphone screen or a smartphone battery will perform according to this or this or this level.
Yeah, fully agreed. It's a matter of quality checks and controls, and we have a pretty good experience at Back Market on these issues, as we work with, as I said, 1,500 different refurbishers. And we, as Back Market, have a lab working for them, identifying good quality parts that we recommend them, because we know it's big work to identify good parts. Thomas just described it. It's feasible for everyone, but it depends on the size of your company and your bandwidth to do it. So we at Back Market, we have a service, identifying good parts and recommending it to refurbishers. Some of our merchants do use it. Others, they run their own quality check. One thing Alexandre said, and is really right, is if you don't use good parts, then you have a high defective rate, and that's not good for your business. So you have people coming back to you asking for being reimbursed. On platforms such as Back Market, you are exited if you have really bad defective rates. So a true professional has no interest in using bad quality parts.
Thank you. Running out of time, but there's still a few very, very interesting questions. So Thomas or Alexandre, how can we ensure that it is the owner of the product? So I'm guessing the question is, how can we ensure that it is up to the owner of the product to accept authorized repairing of a part rather than a repairer before returning the device after repair? For example, to preempt the risk of sub-replacement parts being sold as genuine.
Okay, interesting question. So it would definitely not be problematic at all if there were a menu that you could enter to check whether a part was genuine. So if it's not an intrusive message that you get every time this battery or this screen is not original. So that would definitely be a positive feature, because it would allow the owner of the product to actually check whether an original product was installed if the repairer claims that that's the case. But I can imagine that many consumers would not be so technically minded to then go search into the menus to actually find that information. So the question is then, if we want to make sure that a consumer that is less technically savvy still gets alerted, then it becomes indeed more interesting, because if the message pops up only once, indeed, then the repairer could maybe swipe away the message and it wouldn't be seen again. So one way to maybe structure that would be to have a different authentication for the repairer and for the user, where you could, so the user could actually authenticate the repairer to do everything they needed to do to make sure that the device was functional, but then the final check on the quality of the parts could be only done by the authenticated user. I think it's technically feasible. I think nobody's ever really thought about this problem at this point, but I don't see why would not be technically feasible. But maybe Alexandre has a better idea.
Well, actually, the problem nowadays is that if you are a repair business, usually you need to test out the whole phone before giving out the phone. So usually you need the customer's passcode to be able to test cameras, test the microphones, and so forth. For refurbishment, company would be different because, well, you already bought the phone from someone, so I'm not sure how the property would be transferred to the refurbishment company. If they had to authorize then the part, would the manufacturer actually say yes? Or maybe there could be a function for the initial customer to say, okay, sold my phone. I click on the button, so then next user will take on, or maybe I'm doing a repair. I click, I'll let them put in the parts. Well, it's kind of a problematic solution, and I think it's complicated having parts pairing. Just the global thing is complicated, actually. I mean, there are solutions if you think about it a long time, but it's complicated.
Yeah, and maybe about refurbishment in this business, the refurbisher are the owners of the phones while they repair them. So you couldn't ask for the first owner to authorize a repair by a refurbisher as the actual owner is a refurbisher. So I don't think it would work this way. I think, I mean, at least for refurbishment, but I think it does apply to repair as well. One of the answers to this type of question is not really about having an original part or not, is about the promise you make to the customer regarding the quality of the repair and how long the functionalities are going to be maintained. And regarding this aspect, warranties are really, really key. If you offer good warranty, let's say, I don't know, 2 years warranty on a refurbished smartphone, then knowing whether it's an original part or not is a secondary question. You know, the most important is to make sure you offer good quality product that lasts as long as possible.
I have 2 final questions, so I'll just ask you to be very brief in your replies if possible, because we're already running out of time. The other one is a follow-up on the need for verifying quality parts. So it's more of it's not necessarily a question, it's more of a comment. So the problem is not just for the customer, it's for the repair people as well. In the example of the batteries, as you need to cycle charge to test the batteries when you can't rely on the information they provide, so more work for you. Yeah, so could serialization be good at least for this, as it might avoid professional repairers test every battery, for instance?
But you wouldn't need serialization to test if you have a genuine quality product. So the way I understand it is, if you buy, if for instance Apple does their quality check correctly, then you can be sure that any product that Apple actually sells you will be of sufficient quality, but you don't need serialization as a repairer to make sure that you buy your product from Apple. You know that. So I don't really see the relevance of the serialization to solve that issue.
And as I was saying, what is true is taking time and bandwidth, you know, and for small companies, small professionals, it's a lot of work to do, but you can have bigger companies, such as what we do for our refurbishers, advising good parts, monitoring them, customer review. It's as the market matures, it's going to be easier to identify good quality parts.
But is this a follow-up, Thomas, to what you said? What about for third-party spare parts?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question.
No, there's a follow-up to what you just said about the quality of part. What about for third-party spare parts?
Right. Well, so why would you, if you don't trust the quality of a third-party part, why would you trust their serial numbers? I don't really see, I don't see how serialization could help there either. So if you use a part from a source that you don't trust as is, you need to do quality control. I really don't see a way around that, but maybe I don't understand the question correctly.
Thank you. I think it was that was it pretty much. I'd just like to answer to finish, sorry, the Q&A with a more generic question, which you are all, of course, welcome to answer, but please keep your answer short if you do. It's what's needed in the very, very short term to address this threat. Is it regulations, which I'm guessing some of you might say? Is there something else that we can do, that the general public can do? What should we be doing to mitigate this immediate threat as we understood it to be, thanks to your intervention? Marie, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, well, that's not going to be a surprise. I really believe in regulation and its power. So I think a very short-term thing to do could be including a way to handle serialization and part pairing in the smartphone eco-design regulation. But on the longer term, as Thomas was saying, it has to be horizontal so that it's applicable to any electronics.
Thanks, Marie. Alexandre?
I saw in the comments some of them saying, well, maybe you should do boycotts, maybe some brands, but try asking most of the population stopping to buy from Apple. I'm not sure you'll get very fast results. Yeah, I do believe maybe regulations could help a lot because, well, if you restrict access to some markets like the French market for a brand like Samsung or whatever, they will have to act. But I know it's a long shot. So nowadays, well, I'm still working on solutions to try to bypass all these serial numbers, but I know it's not something everybody can do for now. Hope one day everybody could do that easily. Or, well, yeah, regulations could help a lot, I think.
Thank you. Thomas?
I'm all for regulation.
I knew it. Okay, well, thank you so much for your prompt replies on this last question, and thank you for joining this webinar. So yeah, big thank you for our panelists. Thank you for our audience for asking such good questions as always. As I was telling you in the beginning, the webinar has been recorded, so it will be made available. So if you want to rewatch it, or if you know some people who could be interested but weren't able to attend, please feel free to share the webinar with them. If you want to stay in touch with the work that we are doing on this as the Retropie Campaign and as our members are doing on this, feel free to get in touch and join the campaign on repair.eu. You can also reach out to us on info@repair.eu if you have any specific questions on this, or if you want to get involved with the organization perhaps, or if you want to suggest a collaboration or a project. And we'll hopefully be organizing more of these in the future. So, well, hopefully we'll see you soon at the next webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.